Hi folks, welcome to my channel. Uh, in this session, let's try to understand the architecture of Anthos. Uh, I mean, right now the word Anthos is almost like you can say deprecated because Google is pushing more towards the GKE Enterprise naming convention for that, and they are trying to come out of the traditional naming, which is like Anthos, and then there's the corresponding products like Anthos Service Mesh, Anthos Config Manager. Everything is getting now slowly into integrated as a part of the Kubernetes tab itself in the Google console. So I may repeat the word Anthos in between, but you can start calling it as GKE Enterprise because that's what the new branding which GKE is giving for this. All right. So what is this Anthos? So Anthos is just a unified or a single control plane where you can manage your GKE cluster or an AKS cluster or the AWS EKS cluster or any other on-prem clusters. That's one scenario. At the same time, if you have I mean you have an option to create your GKE cluster in GCP, of course, and at the same time, it's like you can create your GKE cluster in Azure environment as well as in AWS environment as well as in on-prem. So it's like a unified or a single control plane where you can manage all these clusters at one place. That's the the definition at high level, and the idea where this Anthos is built completely on the concept of fleet. So the question may come like what is this fleet? A fleet is a logical grouping of Kubernetes clusters that can be managed together. When we say Kubernetes cluster, it could be GKE or it could be AKS or it could be the combination of GKE, AKS, and EKS. All together, we can combine and logically group into one fleet. We need to remember one thing that a single project can have only one fleet. You cannot create more than one fleet per project. However, a project, I mean, a cluster which is part of the other project can also be part of, a fleet which belongs to some other project as well. I may repeat, let's assume you have two projects. So let's assume, you have a GKE cluster in project 1 and GKE cluster 2 in project 2, and you have your fleet created on your project 1. So the cluster which is part of the project 2 can also be part of the fleet which is created in the project one. That's what I meant. So that kind of flexibility Google has given it. So again, if you go and search in the Google for the architecture diagram for Anthos, you don't find any as such, the old Anthos architecture diagrams. Rather, you'll be redirected to GKE Enterprise. That's the latest diagram, which you can see in my screen. So that's what Google typically recommends. So if you can see, this is the ecosystem of Anthos, where if you see at the bottom, it has the option of Kubernetes clusters created on the Google Cloud or on-premise or an edge or AWS or even the Azure side. This is like one scenario where you can create your GKE clusters on Google Cloud or whether on any of the on-premise, or you can create your GKE cluster on AWS, or you can create your GKE cluster on Azure. This is scenario one. The second scenario, if you see at the the rightmost bottom, which is attached clusters, where the existing AKS clusters which are running on Azure and EKS cluster which are running on Amazon, that can also be managed in a single control plane, which is what a typically a fleet, which you can see in the layer 2, which is like multi-cluster fleet automation. a fleet, as we mentioned in the previous slide, is just a logical grouping of Kubernetes clusters which are part of a single fleet. And I may introduce some of the terminologies which were in the Anthos naming convention. Don't get confused, because you may not find these names in the documentation. But if you do Google search, the components of that definitions, you will be redirected to. When I say components, for example, if you see Anthos Service Mesh, which is ASM, now that is being sit under this security tab where you see zero trust and service mesh. So that's the another component of your Anthos ecosystem, where the typical microservices which are part of these Kubernetes cluster. Any of these Kubernetes cluster are part of this multiple Kubernetes cluster in the case of multi-cluster environment. Okay, before we go and discuss anything further, there are certain things which we need to understand very clear. A fleet can contain single cluster as well, or it can contain multiple cluster. So in case of single cluster, it would be like a single cluster ingress kind of a mechanism we will come across, where it is like a fleet contains multiple clusters. It could be GKE which are created in GCP itself, or the GKE which are created in GCP and Azure, or the combination of GCP, GKE cluster created on GCP and Amazon, or it's like the combination of GKE which is created on Google and the AKS. Or the EKS cluster which is created in that respective public cloud, which is combined as a part of this fleet through attached cluster manner. Still these are part of the single fleet, and it would be like multi-cluster kind of an ingress mechanism. It will come into picture during that kind of scenario. So that's about the service mesh. Basically the microservices which are running on these Kubernetes clusters can be managed through these multi-cluster gateways, multi-cluster ingress, all those mechanisms. That is something to handle these kind of stuffs. Google has the Anthos, or GKE Enterprise has provided a service called as ASM, Anthos Service Mesh, which you don't find the same naming convention nowadays. So this is just an additional information to understand and to get the complete clarity on like how the Google is slowly coming out of that name, and now it's being referred as a cloud service mesh. So this Anthos service mesh is no more called as an Anthos service mesh. It's like slowly into cloud service mesh, and typically this cloud service mesh will be offered in two ways, where it's like a managed complete service mesh, where you need not to sit and install the control plane as well as data plane for the service mesh. It's basically implemented using an open source technology called Istio. That's the popular choice which Google has adopted. One of another beautiful thing about Anthos ecosystem is as many places as possible. It's try to leverage the open source technologies, whereas like this Istio is one of that classic example. So in case of service mesh offering for GKE clusters, which are created in Google, and the GKE clusters which are created in other environments like Azure or AWS, there is a slight difference, which again, when we touch up the topic on Anthos service mesh, we will be going to discuss this in detail. But at the high level, there are two kind of an offering by default for the GKE cluster which is created on Google itself. The service mesh or cloud service mesh implementation will be done through D, traffic director basically. A short term is a traffic D or traffic director, whichever is convenient, you can call that. Whereas the GKE cluster which is created on any other environment, Istio D will be the default kind of an implementation. So the difference is very simple. Is like this traffic director will be built on Google APIs, whereas the Istio-D is built on Istio APIs. Whereas both Istio-D and the traffic director, we can leverage the gateways, virtual service definitions, that kind of lower level implementation definitions and all aspects is not going to change. So it's just that the way the Google offers the services for two different manner for different implementation. That's about service mesh. And another key component about Anthos is ACM, which is Anthos Config Manager. So now again, you don't find that naming convention too often nowadays. So if you go and search for ACM, you will be redirected to the documentation for policy management and config controller, if I'm not wrong. Yeah. So it's like where it's a simple in ACM. It's all about, like, for example, if you want to have some kind of a security policies to be pushed for all the clusters which are part of the fleet. You can always define it and push it through fleet so that it will be deployed to all clusters. The one key thing about ACM is the single source of truth for ACM would be your Git. It could be your GitLab or it could be your GitHub, but the single source of truth would be the Git, where you are maintaining your all configurations, and you're syncing it to all the the clusters which are part of the fleet. If anybody is making some changes manually in these Kubernetes clusters, which are part of the fleet through some other methods, your ACM ensures that this is always in sync. Of course, there are many mechanisms to handle it, like manual sync or auto sync and all. That again, we will be discussing about ACM in a separate session when we start, exploring about ACM in detail. But this is at the high level. I repeat, ACM naming convention also it's slowly going away. Google is rebranding it just with the subcomponents of that ACM, which is like the configuration policy management, or it comes under the governance section in this architecture, if you see. And another layer of or another component of the Anthos, which you see in this diagram, would be an operations, which is basically once this all microservices which are running in multiple these Kubernetes clusters which are part of this fleet, then you may need to start worrying about the kind of the logs which each of these microservices produce, and how we can monitor, and how are during this microservice kind of communication, if there are failures, how we can rectify in which microservice it is failed, that kind of mechanisms, all those things that will be done through logging, and you can always go back and see the logging, and also the monitoring aspects about this microservices, like the CPU, the memory, other resources of your microservice, and if there any scope for any of the microservices to increase because of lack of resources, is there any kind of outage is happening, those kind of platform stuffs as well, that can be handled through monitoring aspects. That's typically comes under operation stack. And ultimately, at the end of the day, the developers who also play a major role in building these microservices, which are again going to be part of your Kubernetes clusters, which is again part of your fleet. So these microservices stuffs, which whatever you deploy basically has to be built as a containers, and there are several tools available for that, but which, since it is a part of the Anthos stack, Google provides cloud run services which we can leverage and do all these kind of an automations. So that's another key component of your stack which we can leverage. So this is at a very high level. So during this entire process, I was repeating a word fleet. So which again I mentioned at the high level, the definition, like what is this fleet? Basically, the logical grouping of the Kubernetes clusters. Again, but do we know more details about fleet at this moment? The answer is no. Definitely, we know we can find out more details about fleet, but at this moment, let's touch base the architecture stuffs. I mean the key component stuffs, and then in the next session we will be focusing completely on fleet, the aspects of the fleet. Basically, how do we measure something which is part of the fleet as some kind of a functionality, with respect to fleet, how we are doing it. There is a concept of sameness with respect to fleet. It could be at the namespace level, it could be at the service level, it could be at the workload identity level. Like that, there are several parameters where you can define that sameness for the fleet, which we are going to discuss in the next session. So let's go to the next slide. So here, the same thing, whatever I have explained now, is just mentioned here, which is about, like, the key components of Anthos. Of course, the first item, which is GKE, that is a main component in your stack. So in the scenario one, when I was explaining about the architecture diagram, I mentioned that the first scenario where the Anthos comes into picture is creating the GKE cluster and the Google itself, and then creating the GKE cluster in Azure, and then in Amazon environment, and any other on-prem environment. So the GKE is one of the key component there, and the second scenario where the multi-cloud support, which I mentioned in the bottom of this slide, where the existing Kubernetes clusters, which is like the AKS in kind of an Azure and EKS in kind of an Amazon, or any other on-prem clusters which are, like, created with the respective public clouds or VMware or any other bare metal kind of an environments. Even that can also be part of your fleet. Moment it becomes a fleet, then that's a single entire control plane is called as an Anthos control plane or GK Enterprise control plane. So that's the another key component. And about Anthos config management, as I mentioned, it is, helps to managing the entire configuration of your Kubernetes cluster, which is again spread across all the environment, where you can, define a single, define the configuration at single place, where I know I was mentioning about the Git, which is single source of truth, and that will go and publish across all the environments. And then the ASM, which is used for your all service mesh aspects, basically the traffic management, the security, and then the another key thing is about this observability features between these microservices, the traffic, how it is spreading, and also the traffic which is spreading between these microservices has to be completely secured. So even that will be achieved through proxies, which is part of your Istio-based service mesh. And then another important service of Anthos is like Anthos Migrate, which is basically helps you. Let's assume you have your typical virtual machine which might be running in any of the public cloud or on-premise, where you have some of the applications which are running on a standalone environment, which is not again a completely containerized or running on Kubernetes. So Anthos offers a service, a GK Enterprise offers a service called the Anthos Migrate, or GK Enterprise Migrate, which will help you to completely migrate these existing applications which are running on your virtual machines into Kubernetes based workload on your Anthos. So that's the another service, which is Anthos Migrate. And then the Anthos application modernization, which we already touch based in our architecture, because this is where you can leverage the tools like for the CI/CD, like the Cloud Run, which helps you to build and deploy the applications which are eventually part of your fleet. And we also talked about Anthos Insights, which will be, which is part of your operations, logging and monitoring. So this is about, the high level information about Anthos. So in the upcoming videos, we will be discussing, more details about the implementation of, this GKE on GCP itself, and then GKE on public clouds like Azure and Amazon. That's the scenario one. And then in the scenario two, where we are trying to attach the existing Kubernetes clusters, which is like the AKS in Azure and EKS in Amazon, to our fleet. So thank you, folks. It's just please wait for the next set of series which will be released very soon, where I'll be discussing about all the aspects of Anthos in detail. And please subscribe to my channel and support me. Thank you so much.